This is Ed Petke with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is May 12th, 2023. I'm conducting an interview with Mr. Lewis Watt in Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you for sitting down and speaking with us today.
You bet.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up?
I was born in Bennington, Vermont, and grew up just 8 miles away on the New York State side of the border in Hoosick Falls, New York, which for our machinery manufacturing center of the world 120 years ago, but not lately.
And what war did you participate in?
Vietnam.
Do you have any other military veterans in your family?
No, in fact, I'm unique in that regard.
So you were the first?
Yes.
Okay. So what made you decide to, and what branch did you serve in?
Marine Corps.
Marine Corps. What made you decide to enter military service?
The NROTC scholarship was the only way I could possibly go to college. My dad had died when I was 12 and a half, and we were poor farmers to start with. So, you know, they paid for 4 years at the most expensive school in New England at the time.
Okay. And why the Marine Corps?
Well, I got to be careful. I should be careful how I say that, but I took my freshman cruise between my freshman and sophomore years on a Navy ship, and I was more impressed with the Marine Corps personnel on board than I was with the Navy.
Uh-huh.
I have to be careful who I say that to.
So you were commissioned. So you went to college,
Right.
and then you went. You went to OA?
No, the way I was commissioned the day I graduated from Tufts,
Okay.
and then went off to the basic school at Quantico for 6 months, which all second lieutenants do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did your training consist of there?
Oh boy, I'm reaching back a few years. But, you know, they wanted to sort out who should be in what MOS, and I wanted to be an infantry officer at the time, so I paid a lot of attention to cross-country navigation, you know, on-the-ground navigation and shooting, as well as everything else a ground marine needs to know.
Mm-hmm.
Good training.
Good training.
They still do that. Yeah.
They do. And so then from, how long did that last?
6 months.
That was 6 months.
Yep.
And then where did you go to from there?
I went to Okinawa and joined the 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion. And I'll go on with that. We sailed up and down the coast of Vietnam, and that was 64. Things hadn't not started at that point.
Okay.
That would have been 63, I'm sorry. But, you know, on an unair-conditioned ship, I was paying my dues. But
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
but we did not go ashore.
What were your primary functions?
At that time, I was the platoon commander of 5 Ontos, the anti-tank, 6 recoilless rifles on each one. I mean, we would have been somebody to contend with, as later other people proved in the war.
Sure. So you were patrol-based, basically just patrolling the shoreline?
We were on a amphibious ship, just waiting for something to happen,
Okay,
which
okay.
did not happen.
Okay.
We expected, there was the expectation of evacuating civilians out of Saigon if things really turned sour. That didn't happen for another 10 or 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you went over there, there was no Vietnam conflict yet.
No, it was simmering. Yeah.
Simmering,
But,
okay.
but
So were you sent over there, you were sent over there in the anticipation of?
right.
Okay. And how long did you spend over doing that?
Well, I was on Okinawa. I was with the 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion for a full year, and then about 2.5 months of that we were sort of in that ready position on the ship.
Mm-hmm. So what would your daily duties be?
Oh boy. I had, what did I have, 20-some troops to man these vehicles, and cleaning weapons, inspecting vehicles, physical workouts, you know, filling time. That's the hard thing.
All while doing on a listing ship?
Yeah, a very hot enlisting ship, yeah.
So to go back for it, you entered military service to go to college. Was that the only reason?
Well, no. I had a stepbrother. My mom had remarried. My stepbrother was a Navy officer, actually, which got me through the interviews to get me selected for the program. So I'd always been thinking armed forces of one kind or another. I had to experience it to figure out what I was going to do.
Okay. So you were second lieutenant when you got out of there.
Yep.
So after you get,
Go ahead.
okay,
No, I was going to say you're coming to the part where I made the decision to go to flight school here, and that was
getting
there
there.
to go. Yeah.
So after you do your tour, your service with the anti-tank,
Yeah.
what do you do after that? What goes on after that?
Well, I could pass a flight physical,
Uh-huh.
and I when I graduated from college, I had waffled and was at the basic school. I waffled between the two choices, and a major who had some influence in my life said, "You can change your mind after you've been an infantry officer and go to flight school, but you can't change the other way.
Okay.
You're done if you wash out of flight school." So I put it off for the year. Applied for flight school as a second lieutenant on Okinawa and got accepted.
Okay. Is that where you did your flight training?
I came back to Pensacola and
Okay.
went through the whole helicopter program there.
Now, do you start with and remain with helicopters only, or do you start with fixed
No,
wing?
I flew the T-34 and the T-28, both
Okay.
fixed wing aircraft,
Mhm.
and then went on to the helicopters. So I did my carrier qualifications. If you watch Fox News on the Intrepid every afternoon, so it's a thrill to see that ship.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I did that and then went off and did the helicopter training.
What struck you as either being very different or very strikingly similar to fixed wing over helicopter?
Well,
If anything.
there's a little bit of an emotional side in there because I had finished very high in my pre-flight and early flying, and the jet pipeline was closed when I finished, so I had no choice but to go to helicopters. So I was a little offended, annoyed, but I subsequently became, how do I say, very satisfied with the helicopter flying. But it's very different, and people ask, which do you like best? I loved them both.
Okay. There's just differences. in it.
Just a lot of differences, yeah.
And what types of helicopters were you flying?
Well, the H-34 was the standard medium-sized helicopter in those days, so I finished in the H-34 in Pensacola and went off to Jacksonville, Florida, to New River, and was assigned to the heavy helicopter squadron flying H-37s, which gets into the story here later, but an interesting monster of an obsolete beast, yes.
So the H-34, what would that more familiarly be called?
No, that was it. The Army had a name for it, which we didn't use. We just called it the H-34.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to describe it, most people who think of Vietnam helicopters think of the Huey.
Yeah, this is gasoline engine, different from the Huey.
Okay.
Yeah, taller, four-bladed prop, whole different propeller system, which I teach
Smaller, larger?
now. Larger than the Huey.
Larger than the Huey.
Half. I would describe it as half again the size of the Huey.
Okay.
On a really hot day, it could carry 3 or 4 passengers, though. I mean, it was.
Oh, okay.
It was struggling in that environment over there.
What was the primary function of the H-34?
Oh boy, they were doing medevacs, which of course the Hueys did as well, resupply. Those would be the primary things.
And there was armament on it?
There were gunners on each side.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
door gunners.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and so when I say how many passengers could they carry, you already had a crew of 4 with 2 pilots and 2 gunners, and one of them as the acting crew chief,
Okay.
and perhaps an extra crew chief. So sometimes 5, a crew of 5.
What's it like your first time airborne and you got the controls?
Yeah, lots of stories there because I was. Because I'd flown the H-37 at New River and then transitioned to the H-34 because that's where I thought they needed me, or that's where they thought they needed me in Vietnam. I got there, I had to recalibrate myself and fly the medium-sized helicopter after flying the heavy. And it was a challenge. I was, because of my infantry time, I was a little more senior than I should have been for my experience. So they were trying to bring me along.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I've got stories that go with that.
So challenging as far as the weight of the helicopter, the size of it, the dynamics?
Just the how do I say, the demands of controlling this flying machine when you were at the limits of its power.
Okay.
Just getting the performance you needed to get it airborne and get your flying, get your altitude.
So when in flying an airplane, now I know little to nothing about an aircraft.
Yeah.
But I do, I think I know, when you're flying an airplane, the airplane in more ways than one flies itself and you just control it.
Less so in the helicopter.
In the helicopter, you're using your hands and your
hands.
feet, and it's always doing
boy.
something. There's no resting.
That's right. There is no resting. And we'll get to the H-37 here soon. I mean, two pilots stayed busy the whole time.
Sure. Because I mean, it's upward and as well as forward
Yeah.
momentum.
Yeah.
Now, did these have the jet exhaust, the jet?
No,
propulsion on it?
because this was
completely
reciprocating engine, just a regular exhaust. So we were
Regular
burning
exhaust.
120 octane gasoline.
All right, so the H-34, then you go to the H-37.
Yeah, what happened was the subunit, half a squadron had come over from the West Coast with the H-37s, and they did some flying, and then they were going home, and they couldn't do without them, even though they were old and obsolete. So they started sorting around in the wing who had flown the H-37, and I was one of several people they found, and I don't remember having a choice. So I was back to the H-37, which turned out to be a very favorable transition for me.
So
Took me a few days to get back into flying the big old H-37.
right. Did you prefer the 37?
After a while I did, yeah.
Okay.
I was partly because the H-34 squadron I joined was really salty people who had been through a heck of a lot already, and they didn't need the new guys quite so much. The H-37, we were all coming into the group.
Okay.
The East Coast H-37 pilots were forming the new subunit. The new.
So you're essentially all starting from the same
Yeah.
basic spot, so there were no salty dogs.
No, and I was still a little low on the experience side, but yeah, there were some people who had been flying H-37 for a few years that I flew with.
Mm-hmm.
But my seniority was just right. I became the operations officer of the subunit, so it was very nice.
Very good. So the H-37, the function and the use for that, is it essentially similar to the 34?
Less medevacs. I mean, we were too big and slow to be
Okay.
doing the dangerous medevacs, so it was mostly resupply.
Resupply, any troop transport?
A lot of troops transport, both Vietnamese and Marines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting. So when you're South Vietnamese Army?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you stick with the H-37?
I stuck with it for the rest of that 13-month tour,
Okay.
and
And
later came back and flew the A4 Skyhawk, years later. So we'll talk about that.
So after the 37, 13 months in that,
Yep.
what year is this at this point?
67, spring
67.
of spring of
So
67.
things are ramping up
Yeah.
a lot more.
Yeah.
And where are you at this point?
We were doing most of our interesting flying, if I can say that, out of Dong Ha, up 20, 30 miles south of the DMZ.
Okay.
And Cantien was one of the hot spots.
How long? What year did you get to that? When did you get to actually being in country in Vietnam?
Oh boy, let's see. I can't give you the months here, I think, but June to July, June of '66 to July of '67.
Okay. So you didn't have, I don't want to use the word luxury, but you weren't stateside when your time in the war kicked off. You were already.
Yeah, and I was a volunteer to go early.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You did. Reason for that? Just wanted to.
I this is a terrible thing to say, but career-wise, I had to get my share of it, and I had to show my stuff, and that got me over there, which was dumb in retrospect. But
Yeah, but we're young. We do silly things, right?
I did get my share, as it turns out.
No doubt. Okay, so you were, to go back to where you were operating out of when you first got there.
Yeah, Marble Mountain.
Marble Mountain.
Primarily. Yep.
Okay, and where was that in Vietnam?
Well, this is all I Corps, which is the northern Corps.
Okay.
So essentially, all of my flying in all the types of aircraft where it was I Corps. Yeah.
And what unit are you assigned to at this point?
Well, we were subunit 1 was what we were called
Subunit 1.
of MAG 36,
Mag 36,
which was the CH-37. Half a squadron is what it amounted to.
And how many helicopters would be in a squadron?
A full squadron would have been 12. I think we had 7 or 8, of which, on a good day, 3 or 4 were flyable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, is that due to mechanical issues
Yeah.
or being shot up?
No,
a little bit of both?
not being shot up so much as spare parts and mechanical issues.
Okay.
These were pioneer flying machines. The H-37 was the first helicopter approved for instrument flight, to give you an idea of
Oh, wow.
how early, and we flew them in instrument conditions.
Okay, so old school.
Old school, you betcha.
And so your mechanics were your angels on your
Oh
wings,
boy,
on your shoulders.
we had some amazingly good mechanics, yeah, and crew chiefs.
So do you recall your first non-training or your first actual, I don't want to say use the word combat mission, but combat mission?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the H-34 before I made the transition
Okay, sure.
here, and I'll leave some parts out of this. But one night we did not have a standby cruise. The squadron had moved from Fubai down to Marble Mountain, and we didn't have standby crews, and my tent mate who put the schedule together came by and said, got to launch 2 helicopters. I won't use the language he used. And he said, you're one of the co-pilots. I said, fine. Then he came back within minutes and said, you're aircraft commander of Dash 2. And I said, that's fine. And we took off. We jeeped down and got in the aircraft. And Dash 1, the leader, who was very competent, called me and said, I've lost my FM radio, so you've got the lead. And now it's getting dark, and we're loading up with mortar rounds to go to drop off the mortar rounds and pick up casualties. Can I go on with this story?
Sure.
And now I'm the flight leader. Oh boy, this is what I signed up for. And we called the ground people, and I was probably talking to an 18-year-old kid. I said, inbound with your mortar rounds, what am I landing to? He said, you're landing to my flashlight, and if I turn it off, get out of here, they're shooting at me. I said, this is the standard answer. Roger that. And we made 2 round trips, and because of various circumstances about the leadership, nothing was ever done about that mission except that my crew chief, who barely knew me, I got out of the aircraft and he shook my hand and said, good flight, Skipper. That made my day. I've had a couple of those where,
Sure.
That's all the thanks I needed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that was my first real interesting combat mission.
And so how much of a distance is that flight that you're making?
Oh, 15 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it feels like a lot more than 15
It
miles.
does, because we're rocketing along at 65 knots.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. So flying by instruments, my understanding, primarily that's a daytime or a daylight type of operation. Are there many night flights by instrument, and what is that like?
Got it. Well, back then, months later, when I was flying the H-37, the bigger of the beasts, we did a fair amount of ferrying the aircraft back and forth from Marble Mountain to Dong Ha in night instrument flight, which was crazy. I guess is the word. Some people were very reluctant to do it. But
I'm sure.
We coped all right.
Now, forgive my ignorance, is there night vision involved?
No.
There's nothing back then like that.
No.
It's
You're talking air traffic control on your flying instruments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how long do you stay over at Marble Mountain?
We continued to be stationed at Marble Mountain for the rest of my 13 months over there, but we would fly 2 or 3 aircraft to Dong Ha, which was up near the DMZ, and take our 2 or 3 day turn, and then we'd be relieved. So we were switching units back and forth. So some of my subunit mates, half squadron mates, I rarely saw them because we managed to stay in the opposite rotation. But if we had 2 or 3 aircraft up that could do the resupplies out of Dong Ha to Cantien, among other places, and I'm sure you've heard Cantien from various interviews, we'd be up there doing it.
Okay. So Marble Mountain's your home base, essentially.
Right. The maintenance was done,
Maintenance was done, resupply and all that stuff, and then you're going to these, if you call them satellite bases.
Yeah, right. Mostly just one satellite base, and that was Dong Ha.
Okay.
And the next story will make that clear for you.
Okay. Any flights out into the field as far as, because it wasn't so much a troop, but are you going out into the paddies? You going out into the fields?
Oh yeah. Well, now what Dong Ha was, there was a runway there, and the refueling was there, and forget my vocabulary, but the supply point with the mortar rounds and the ammunition and the sea rations that the Marines needed were all there, and we would load up and go to wherever we were sent to deliver the stuff, and occasionally bring troops out, and rarely bring casualties out.
Okay. So when you're bringing out supplies, is this stacked in the aircraft, or is this hung and
Oh
suspended?
no, never external, because there was
Never
no
external.
no place to test the hooks and keep them working.
Oh, okay.
So everything was loaded in.
Okay.
That had some interesting consequences, which I'll get to.
So, what are some interesting consequences?
Okay, here's the people that are watching this that know Vietnam know Con Tien was a trouble spot off and on. It was a routine place for us initially, so we would land at Con Tien with a resupply, and we would open the big clamshell doors on the front of this H-37 and get the stuff out of the front off the ramp, which was on the front of the aircraft, uncharacteristically. That's fine until a mortar round lands nearby, and it takes 15 seconds to get those doors closed.
Oh, man.
So after that particular day, the unloading was throwing out the side doors. We never opened the front hatch again. Con Tien just got worse and worse after that.
So was it impossible to take off with the doors open?
Well, it was structurally unsound. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Now that day, I think the doors weren't quite latched. When I was dash 2, and my leader said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at your 6." I was airborne. We're latching things up. Crew chief was latching things up.
So how many combat flights did you take?
You know, people had different ways of counting, so I'm reluctant to answer that. But I flew about 900 hours in the helicopters over there, so you can divide that in various ways. But you know, the typical sortie, usually one mission would be 4 or 5 trips. So we counted missions, and we were honest about it. So it was not a. If other people came along later and were counting sorties, it would be 900 sorties, which was ridiculous.
So if you went, if you made 4 or 5 trips in one sortie, you counted that as one.
That was one mission number.
One mission.
Yep.
Okay.
We went by mission number. So.
Was there a magic number that you tried to get to?
We were going out of business every month as the H-46s came in, and they could carry more than we did, even as though we were larger. So you know, each month they say, "No, we can't do without you." You know, so we just kept flying.
Okay.
I wasn't trying to achieve any particular thing. We were flying to a physical, I won't say exhaustion, but we were doing all we could.
Right, and of course, you know, back then, it's not air conditioning.
There's
no comfort.
No, and it was hard work flying this beast.
What kind? They were armored. Was there any kind of armor?
Well, we had door guns.
Well, no armor as far as nothing to prevent rounds coming in.
A piece of steel under my butt. You know, that was about it. Yeah.
So you mentioned flying South Vietnamese as well.
Yeah.
Is there a different? There's no difference in the mechanics of it, but is there a different mindset? Is there a different? If you know what I'm getting at, is there a different way of doing that?
I will say we were more careful, but there was never a problem, except for the 55-gallon drum of fish oil that had to go with them when they were going when they were going someplace to stay a while. Bless their hearts for that. But they had been infiltrated. We knew that, and there would, if some bad guy left the grenade in the airplane and the flying machine after he got out, it would be over. So we were careful, but I never had an issue.
So at this point, when you're over here, are you able to keep in touch with folks back home?
Oh, letter mail.
Letter mail.
Yeah.
And you were sometimes carrying those letters, weren't you?
Occasionally, yeah. That's not something we did routinely, but yeah. May I tell you a short story there? So I flew back into Marble Mountain one time after days of flying. They handed me my mail, and I ripped open one envelope. It was, "Tufts throws the ROTC unit off campus." Talk about ruining my day, protesting the Vietnam War in my alma mater.
Yeah,
that was a bad day, but I won't go any further with that one.
So when you're over there, are you aware of all the protests and all the negativity that's going on back in the States?
We were getting some newspapers and hearing about it.
What goes through your mind when this is going on?
You lock it out. That's what we did. We locked it out. They're ignorant. They don't know what we're doing. And we think we're winning this war, which we did at the time. And you can't dwell on it. Some people did dwell on it. I didn't. But yeah.
As a young man, out of his country, probably for the first time, now you're in a combat zone. What
Yeah.
what goes through your mind as far as, I mean, how long does it take for the realism and the
Yeah.
this is happening to set in?
You know, I was I was living with the reality pretty soon. I mean, we were taking our risks and getting shot at, and just going to get through my 13 months here and do the best job I can, and get on with my career and my life. You know, so I wasn't. Back to the previous question. So I wasn't so troubled with what was going on back in the States till I got back.
Right. It's another story.
Yeah.
Did you? The air wing usually is kind of keeps to it and of itself.
Yeah.
Did you get to interact and mix with the regular GIs or the regular
Just
guys?
you know, they were my passengers. That's
Okay.
really all. But I rarely had conversations with the
Okay.
ground
So they
officer.
were faces on your
Yep,
aircraft, and
right.
then
Yeah.
there were new faces on your
Yeah.
aircraft.
Yeah. And sometimes saluting and showing their gratitude when they got out of the aircraft too.
So is this the you know, sometimes the aircrafts, it got to a point where they wouldn't even touch down. You hover, things
Yeah.
get thrown out and jumped out.
We rarely did that.
Okay.
Although after the clamshell door thing at Cantillon,
Yeah.
we kept power on and we stayed light on the wheels
Mhm.
while we threw supplies out the doors. Then we got airborne and out of there as quick as we could, but not usually with people.
Okay.
That was the resupplies.
Resupplies. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get to another story on that here.
So what is it? What is a typical rotation? Is there a set rotation?
It was
being a
13.
pilot?
It was there. Oh well.
I mean, as far as daily or weekly, how? I mean,
Oh.
time on, time off. Is there a rotation, or is it?
Depends on the
as
requirements.
needed, you're
As
going?
needed. I mean, we had people. Well, I had a 190-hour month. You know, which flying the demands of the CH-37. I remember being a fairly tired puppy at the end of that month.
I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
But that's one thing, we had to heat it up a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Most of that out of Cantillon,
Okay.
up on the northern edge of the Vicor.
Did you normally fly with the same crew, or was it?
We would rotate a little bit, but a name is going to come up. Bob Keeler, who was my co-pilot a lot of times, who was an excellent pilot. But yeah.
Did air crews get to kind of form themselves? Hey, I want to fly with this guy, or we have history.
Yeah,
or
well,
did
I was the operations officer, so I got to do some assigning in that regard. So
Okay.
I picked.
It's
I
good to
took
be the
care-
boss.
Yeah, it is. But we had one or two problem pilots over the course of the 9 months that I was flying the H-37s after the H-34 thing. So we had to share the pain of flying with the people who maybe weren't quite as skillful, and I was careful with that.
Okay. How do you? I mean, how do you? I mean, you're going out. You're mostly flying over jungle?
Yeah, jungle and the rock pile, which you've heard about, and
River.
river, following rivers sometimes
rivers.
when we were struggling with power to get airborne, get up between the trees along the river. But I remember a couple of those instances. We
So-
were power limited.
Tell me one of those stories about power limited.
Oh boy, yeah, I got in trouble with one of the pilots who maybe wasn't as aggressive as some of us. There were a bunch of Marines left in the valley along the Ho Chi Minh Trail that needed to get out of there, and they were on a dirt runway that was left over from the French era. And I was Dash 2 that day. I wasn't leading the flight. Dash 1 took his load and left 21 Marines standing there. I said, load them all in. My co-pilot, who also won a DFC, I should give him the credit, said, you're crazy. And I said, can't leave them here. And I took off and we went down the river with full power on that beast, able to climb just enough to get out and get back to Dong Ha, where I got these Marines safely out. And that was borderline stupid, but I
You
couldn't
got
leave.
home.
I couldn't leave with I couldn't leave 3 or 4 Marines standing there.
No.
So-
There's a sense of duty, and
Yeah.
we're going to make this work.
Right.
Make this work. I would talk about, was there any downtime, and what did you do in your time if you were down? Was there any opportunity to have any kind of recreation?
Yeah, well,
Or-
once in a while when we were rotating back and forth to Marble Mountain, at least we would fly missions out of there too, but usually we had a couple of days of taking some downtime, getting to the club and having a cold beer.
Okay.
Yeah, so That rotation, even though there was a 90-hour month in all of this, it worked out real well. 3 or 4 days of flying, hours a day, and then a couple of days with nothing. It was very nice.
Which doing nothing has its advantages. And
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, doing our ground jobs, writing the flight schedule and taking care of
so
things.
never really off duty.
Never really off duty, but much more relaxed.
So I see you wearing a Distinguished Flying Cross shirt here. You're a member of the society.
I am, yeah.
Can you tell me the story about how you
I
received
can,
your
and you've set me up for this just right. So we were at Dang Ha, flying in the typical kind of day, 3 mission numbers that day, and I was leading the flights, and Bob Keeler, who I mentioned earlier, was my co-pilot. So we're flying back into Dang Ha, and there was an air group operations officer there. So I called in and said, Junkman was our call sign, by the way. Junkman inbound, done for the day, and there was this pause, and he said, Junkman, we got another mission for you. And I said, Roger that. And he said, you can turn this one down. And I said, go ahead. Emergency resupply of a couple of companies of Marines that were up really close to the DMZ. I'll say more or less surrounded. And I said, we'll take that mission. And my friend Keeler reminded me of this years later. He said, and I remember him saying his part. He said, "You real sure we want to do this, Lou?" And I said, "We're going to do this, Bob." And he said, and he looked at me, across the cockpit, and I said, "These Marines need us." I'm alleged to have said that, and I guess it's true. So we flew 5 round trips with 2 helicopters loaded to get these guys mortar rounds. Flew a few casualties out. Did not get shot. We didn't take hits. We think the Vietnamese were laughing themselves at us. But 2 other things happened. Aside from being able to turn the mission down and getting it done, leading to the DFC, a couple other things happened. One was the first trip in, they said, you're landing on this ridge line, watch the smoke. So we're checking the smoke. And I look at this ridge, and hell, I'm looking to the North Vietnam from up in the cockpit of my CH-37. We'll be back with another load, but we're landing on the low ground just south of where you landed this time. The grunts were annoyed that they had to carry the gear a little farther. I said, I'm not sitting on the skyline for minutes while we unload. So we did, and while we were doing one of those missions, an acquaintance of mine who didn't know, of course, didn't know who was flying which helicopter, flew over and when he was forward air controller. I can't use the language he used, but it was, what the heck is Junkman doing there? It was not a mission that would have been offered to us if they hadn't been desperate.
Oh, okay.
So we got the mission done, and it wasn't the most glorious of missions, but we got it done, and we could have turned it down. So that was the big deal.
So for those who don't know what the Distinguished Flying Cross is, how does one earn? What's the criteria to earn?
The best description I've heard is be in the wrong place at the wrong time and do the right thing, which is basically what we did that day. But you got to do, I'm embarrassed to say it, you got to do something a little bit extraordinary and show some flying skill while we're doing it, which we certainly did that day. So
I think I read heroism or distinction while in air.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, and it used to, and there were civilians early on, of course, Lindbergh and the rest. But
so,
anyway,
and this is an award that goes back to World War I, correct?
It did. Well, it was initiated in 1926, but then they reacted back to at least one pilot who flew in World War I. So he's the earliest recipient, but Lindbergh got the first medal actually.
Okay. And so, how do you know when you earned it? I mean, is there? They say, "Hey, listen, you got the cross," or
no,
is there a ceremony, is there a presentation?
Oh yeah, and I left, and there was talk again. My co-pilot had a lot to do with that because he was in on this decision to go fly this mission, and I guess I vaguely knew that I was being written up for the DFC, but I didn't think about it till I got back to Jacksonville, North Carolina, New River Marine Corps Air Station, and sure enough, the award came in, and that was a big day.
I'm sure it was. How do you get notified of that?
Well, the squadron CO says, hey Watt, get up here. He said we're going to have a ceremony tomorrow. I don't remember how that went, but photos and the whole thing, because it was a big deal.
It is a big deal. I mean, and I'm sure at the time you're saying, well, I was just doing my job.
That's right.
It was my duty, my mission, and what came of it.
Yeah.
How do you? I mean, do you? Is it easy to accept those accolades? Do you want to shun them? Do you want to
No,
push them aside? I mean, you want to, yeah, you're humbled by them.
yeah, I was humbled, and I don't lie awake thinking about this, but I put 10 lives at risk,
Okay.
and I do.
Hmm.
That bothers me. So, but I was delighted to get the award, put it that way. Yeah, and it's helped me, of course, but it didn't hurt my career.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
And now I'm secretary of the society, so I'm paying back for all of that.
And I want to talk about the society in a minute. But was that the most significant? Now that was the incident that earned you the cross.
Yeah.
Was there an incident that, in your mind, is more significant in your mind of what you did?
There's one. I came home for years. Went back in '71 flying the A4, and there was one mission I flew there, which I was at least equally significant, which didn't get any attention at all until years later. But
Can you talk about that mission?
we okay for time? I'd love to tell you about that mission.
We're great.
So we couldn't talk about this for a while because it was in Laos.
Mm-hmm.
Lamsong 719. We get a call from a forward air controller saying, I got grunts in trouble in this little valley and we need to get them covered. What are you packing? We said, napalm and snake eyes, retarded bombs. And he said, perfect. And he said, I'll mark it with smoke. And so two of us each made 2 passes. And you below treetop level, and when all you can see in your front windshield is the target, you pickle a couple off. And we coated the valley with the bad guy part of the valley with napalm and 500-pound bombs. Years later, I was a civilian, or I'd retired, and I was talking to an accountant at Clemson University, and he knew that I had military experience. He said, I was over there, and we started the conversation. He was one of the grunts that was trapped on the ground.
Oh,
now,
wow.
we can't document this, but we compared notes. He said, my lieutenant was already dead, my platoon sergeant was wounded, and I was in charge, and we were dying. We were going to be dying. And along came these 2 A4s down between the trees and gave us life.
Mm-hmm.
Hugs and tears. Oh, man.
Right.
Yeah, so that was a big deal. And that was as valuable to me as the medal. And
Sure.
never got written up because Lamsong 719, you couldn't write it up.
No, because
But
we weren't supposed to be there.
We weren't supposed to be there then, but that was one of the missions of my life.
Well, there's
That's
got to
fair.
be, I mean, awards and accolades aside, it's the personal
Absolutely.
gratification of doing your job, and guys got to go home because of that.
Absolutely.
So that I'm sure that's
Yeah.
probably worth more than its weight
Oh
in
yeah,
gold to you.
yeah, more than the medals. You
More
bet.
than the medals.
You bet.
So you were flying an A4, which is not a helicopter.
Right.
How do you transfer? How do you
Oh.
go from helicopter to jets?
Well, I said teasingly to my monitor, the human resources people, after I came home the first time, I said, and I had very good orders. Anyway, I was at Patuxent River in between becoming a test pilot.
Mhm.
But I said, hey, I know I need to go back, but I want to shoot back next time after flying that H-37 over there.
Uh-huh.
And he said, yeah, we'll arrange for a transition into the A4, which we did. And I barely got trained enough to do that. So
Okay.
the fact that I was able to perform the missions, the training was overloaded and understaffed. And so I got enough done, so they let me fly the A4, but barely.
So is the A4, is that considered a fighter, a bomber?
No, it's really an attack
An
aircraft.
attack aircraft.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
single seat?
no, I was flying, mostly they are single seat. The ones, again, I wind up in these subunits. We had, I guess, 5 TA4s, which is the trainer.
Okay.
And usually when I flew, half the time there was nobody in the back seat. The only time anybody in the back seat is somebody wanted to go
Okay.
earn some mission credits and wanted to fly along.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-seater, but you were flying as a 1-seater.
Flying at a 1-seater,
Okay.
right. With 500 pounds less gas because of the seat and the guy in the back,
Uh-huh.
which was interesting.
So you're going, what, say in a helicopter, you say about that 65 knots?
Yeah, that beast, yeah.
To, what's an A4 doing?
350, 400, yeah.
What's that like the first time?
Oh, it was wonderful. And again, people ask me which was best. I said I loved flying with a crew, but I loved the speed and the things I could do in the A4.
Now the A4, is that land-based or carrier-based?
It can be carrier-based. We were flying them out of Da Nang.
Okay, so you were flying land-based.
Just barely enough runway, 10,000 feet on a hot day.
So in order to get certified in that, do you have to do your carrier landings, or
No,
did you?
I'd done my carrier landings in the T-28 back
Okay,
in
so
flight
that
school.
qualified you for that.
Yeah, and if if somebody had said, "Hey, we're going to deploy on the carrier," I would have been in an interesting corner. I could have done it. But,
Uh-huh. How long did you fly those missions in the A4?
well, we came. The air group I was with was coming home, so I got there in January, came home and started home in May. So yeah, really about 4.5 months of flying. This time I counted missions. I flew 40 missions in the A4.
Wow.
A variety of missions.
Uh-huh.
Zuni rockets and snake eyes and napalm, as I described them, and it's just 500-pound bombs.
So those are targeted missions to specific targets,
Yeah, usually forward air controllers airborne, Air Force commonly, finding targets and then calling us in.
Okay,
Yeah,
so they're not pre-known,
No,
except for maybe a couple minutes.
no, that's right. We'd take off, hoping somebody'd find something good for us,
Okay,
and they did.
I'm sure they did.
I guess this is okay to say. First time I shot Zuni rockets over there was the second time I'd shot Zunis in my life. I'd had one training op, and I got confirmed kills on my first Zuni op. Oh man!
Now those are air to air. Are those?
Well, it's air to ground, Mach 2 air to ground with 20-odd pounds of explosives. But boy, you catch bad guys in the jungle, you can get them out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So
You said you did 40
missions.
40 missions in that.
Wide variety of missions.
Every time you went up, was there something dropped or shot?
Yeah, we tried not to come home with any ordnance on the aircraft. We didn't want to waste the thing. And there was, are we doing okay here?
Great.
So the war was winding down in the minds of my leaders. This is 71, and they ramped back up after that. But we were going home. So the rule went out, you got to have the ordnance off the airplane 3,000 feet above the ground. That's the range of small arms.
Yeah.
We don't want anybody hit. So blessedly, I was the wingman that day, so I took off in my A4, and we had wall-to-wall Zuni, 16 Zuni rockets on each of 2 A4s, and the ceiling was at 2,500 feet. We're supposed to be shooting the ordnance like at 5,000, and at least be done at 3,000, and we weren't coming home with Zuni rockets. So we went out and took out about 1,000 yards of bunkers, so they couldn't find any red-hot targets, but we did some real damage, came home. And I had a bullet hole in my external fuel tank, and I got my ass chewed for that one. I said, this lieutenant colonel was chewing me. I was still a captain. He was, I told you to be, I said, that must have happened in the landing pattern, Colonel. He said a dirty word,
So you had no idea it had happened until you landed?
Right. And that fuel tank was, I had already drained that fuel tank,
Okay.
so it was an external tank. So there was no real issue there. But it was a fun day.
So so after you do those 40 missions, you were on your way home. Is your time in Vietnam done at that point?
Yeah, there's a great question. You got to serve 6 months to get credit for a tour.
Oh.
And I'm looking at my calendar and saying, I'm going to get home too soon. And they said, we need a volunteer to be the CO of troops aboard a ship that's taking a load of troops home. I said, bingo. They kept me out of. They counted. Okay. So I was 6 months and a few days out of the U.S. So I got credit for an overseas tour. But I paid.
What ship it was?
It was either the Raleigh or the Durham. I sailed them.
Okay.
One of them was off the coast of Vietnam in '63, and one of them was coming back. They're the same. They're sister ships, but.
So that was coming home, shipped to the States.
To the States, right?
And where did you? What was your path coming home?
Yeah. Oh, well, a quick stop in Hawaii to make repairs on this old ship, and then slog on off to the West Coast, and thinking San Diego.
Okay. So in Hawaii, you stopped. That was Pearl Harbor. You stopped at.
Yeah.
What'd you think of Pearl Harbor?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I'd been there at that point, but okay. yeah. Amazing. Everybody should see that.
Is there a significance of? Because we all know what happened.
Oh boy.
At Pearl Harbor in 41.
Absolutely significant.
Do you feel that?
Oh yes. You can't not have feelings about that. Yes. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then so you go to San Diego. San Diego is when you're coming home. At that time, I speak. It's no secret that the homecoming for a lot of people was not positive.
Yeah.
How was your homecoming when you got back?
The first time, I was married, and that ended a year or so later. Partially because of what I was doing for a living. The second time, I was single but engaged, and she was proud of what I was doing. So there was that part. Mm-hmm. But I just stayed away from civilians. Okay. I just, people being spit on, whatever. But landing on a ship and pulling up dockside was much better than landing at an airport and having to deal with civilians in the middle of the night.
So you didn't have to really deal with any of that anti.
No,
I'm sure
I
you
didn't.
saw it.
I saw it,
but you didn't really have to deal with it.
I stayed away from it. Yep.
That's good. So, all right. So when you got home, what's your next task?
Well,
what's your next
I got a good break then. I went back to Washington and finished my master's degree, and then went to the assignment office. I got to fill in a little bit here. Between my two tours in Vietnam, I went to the test pilot school at Patuxent River and tested helicopters for a couple of years. Now I went back and I wound up getting my master's degree, getting assigned to being the monitor, the human resources manager of Marine Corps majors. I sent myself back to Patuxent River, this time on faculty of the test pilot school. So I had a dream career because I had an engineering degree. I should throw that in. So, yeah.
So what kind of helicopters were you testing?
Well, I did the Navy's preliminary evaluation on the AH-1J, the first twin-engine Cobra. Okay. So that gives you an idea how long ago.
That was cutting edge.
That was cutting edge at the time, and we learned some things. There were some issues. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I swept some mines, which nobody had done at that point, and in Long Island Sound, we were sweeping lobster pots, is what we were saying. We really annoyed some people, but we tested that equipment, did some of that. I tested various modifications on the H-53s and H-46s, but the new helicopters I tested personally were the Jet Ranger, which finally, 55, 56 years later, is being replaced, and the AH-1J, the twin-engine Cobra. So we would say I was proud of doing that. And
how does that differ from what you were flying?
Oh boy, totally different. But in the test pilot school, we got to fly a wide variety of things. So getting in the helicopter that nobody else in the service had flown that's what it was all about.
Sure.
And we were cautious and took all the proper precautions.
Right.
Which were enough, blessedly.
So after you go to the test pilot school, I mean, you continued your career. You made a career out of the military.
I did.
All the way into the 80s.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of luck, as you're gathering from all this, but I got this master's degree from George Washington, and they called it management engineering is what they call the degree. And meanwhile, the guy who replaced me in the assignment position gets this piece of paper, and he called me and said, "What the hell is this?" He said, "What is management engineering?" I said, "Find something else." I didn't think it made any difference.
Yeah.
And I said, "Give me a choice." He said, "Industrial engineering?" I said, "Bingo." Months later, I get this phone call from the same person. "Need an industrial engineer at the Naval Aviation Depot at Cherry Point, North Carolina." I said, "Tell me about that." He said, "Why do you have 2,500 civilians working for you?" I said, "Bingo." And then later, to round out my career, I became the commanding officer of the Aviation Depot, which was a job. When I got to 20 years, I'm staying in to get that job, which I did get. So.
And what does that entail?
Well, we were overhauling 5 different types of aircraft and at least as many engine types and all kinds of components, with the wonderful workforce of North Carolina civilians, which I still praise them. So very, very satisfying. So that was almost the end of the career.
Okay. And did you after your career in the military ended, did you keep flying?
I flew. Your watchers are not going to believe this. I flew 100 different type model series aircraft in my 24 years. So I said, I don't want to do this anymore. So I took a few years off, and then one night at a pub, we were talking to this guy who was the jump master at the local jumping parachute facility, and he said, I'm desperate for a pilot, and I'm thinking, I could do that. And I did that for a couple of years, but that's crazy. That's dangerous flying.
Oh yeah. That's low flying.
Yeah, well, they were jumping out of the airplane at 10,000 feet above the ground, but then I had to lean over and get the door closed, which was not always as simple as it should have been. Latches hanging up and straps hanging out the door and whatever. I'm looking at it, 10 knots over stall speed at 10,000 feet, and I said, I began to have some chest pains. I said, so 2 years of that I did that, but I didn't do a lot of flying.
2 years probably felt like 10.
Yeah, I did. I was delighted to be done with that. The next thing.
So post-military. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I had my own company. Well, I went to work. I did a variety of research and development jobs for a while, including at the Applied Research Lab at Penn State, and then had my own company for a little while doing machinery health monitoring. And then one thing led to another. I wound up teaching freshman engineers at Penn State, and at age 82, I'm still doing that. Wow! When I love that. I have some stories to tell them, as you can see here.
Yeah, no, this is great. So you're part of the Distinguished Flying Cross Society,
right? And
you hold a position in that.
I'm secretary.
Secretary. So what does the Distinguished Flying Cross Society do?
What we're very sensitive about maintaining the records, maintaining people's sensitivity and awareness of what the award was, and enticing people to stay with it and get their records on, get on record, because the individual services don't talk to each other. We can't tell how many DFCs there are out there. And we got about 2,700 members, but I know I kind of found out about it by accident. So we come to events like this to make sure people understand that there's such a society out there that recognizes the importance of the award.
And if somebody believes they have one, earned one, or says they have, or their family member does, you have ways to
we do, and we have the occasional person trying to get membership. We
like anywhere else.
Like anywhere else, but we can check. You got to have a citation. Somebody's got to have a valid citation.
And if you have one, it'll be somewhere.
That's right, and that's tricky. The Army has had records burned. I forget which city, but so yeah, it's just hard to come by sometimes.
And where is the society? Is it based out of one location, or does it have a headquarters?
Headquarters, San Diego is where the office is, but we've got people all over the country. Now it happens, we've got 4 of us here today who, I drove my 4 hours down from State College, Pennsylvania, so I'm one of the closest to Washington. But we've got one guy here from Virginia and another Pennsylvanian here. Okay. So we do our best to come to events where we can meet more people and make them aware of the society.
And I'm sure that there are instances where people probably have legitimately earned it, but they can't be found.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some disappointed people. Generally, if it's genuine, we can work it out.
Okay.
We can get witnesses.
How long does a process like that take?
Oh, well, I haven't been through that enough times to really give you a positive answer, but you can figure out in a month what's going on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, if there's a citation and a witness or two, bingo, we're set.
And does being the secretary, what is your what do you do?
I'm on the phone. We meet 4 times a year. Now we're doing Zoom now, like everybody else. Okay. But I'm listening to 17 guys my age and trying to take notes and turn it into a document that says, here's where we are and here's what we're doing. Okay. And it's a challenge. I'm ready to be replaced, put it that way.
Gotcha. So how has your wartime experience affected your life?
Oh boy. Well, there was a marriage, and I'm going to give you a positive answer. I was this poor farm kid who got himself through college somehow, and I learned later that I didn't really have the right instincts for the business world. Okay. I'm doing pretty well at teaching, but for me, it was a very satisfying career. I tell my engineering students now that I've told them, man, I have an engineering degree. He said, we're going to get you in the test pilot school. Said, bingo. And then later, CO of the aviation depot with 3,500 people because I had those degrees. Oh, I mean, I've had a very satisfying career. So it was the right choice for me. And I'm still making the most of it with Penn State University, teaching these freshman engineers.
And you have a wealth of life experience and practical experience.
Yeah.
To
I
back
have,
that up.
yeah, to get it into context here, I have more stories than your average professor. And,
Which stories is what people love.
They remember them.
They remember them,
Yep.
and it puts a human element
Yep.
to it and a relatability,
Yep, yep.
which is it's
Yeah.
valuable.
Yep.
Valuable. So we're sitting here, we're filming this today.
Mhm.
Future generations of yours
Oh,
down
boy.
the line may watch this one day.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that you would like your great grandchildren to know about your time in the service
Yeah.
and your time in
Yeah.
wartime, what would that be?
Well, you've kind of put your finger on it. Do your job, fly your missions, or do your ground missions, whatever. Focus on what the mission is, and don't worry about what the public thinks, or what. Here we are inside the Beltway. I should be careful about that, but yeah. And give it your best shot. That's all. Yeah.
Well said.
Ignoring. Here I am teaching at Penn State. The protests were wild at Penn State,
Yeah.
but I had no relationship with Penn State at the time. Yeah.
Does that still kind of bug you a little bit in the back of your mind?
Yeah, every once in a while. As you can imagine, I don't talk politics with my fellow faculty.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to document today? Any story that you'd
No,
like to
you-
tell that we haven't touched on?
Thank you for letting me tell the stories I really wanted to tell. Those 3 or 4 were
Oh,
the ones
my
that
pleasure.
stuck with me.
My pleasure. Well, sir, I want to thank you for your
You
service.
betcha.
I want to thank you for sitting down and speaking with me
You
today.
betcha. Thank you, sir.
Welcome home.
Great interview.